Okay, colleagues, we'll make a start. Agenda item number 1, apologies. I've got one, Councillor Lisa Eldred, Councillor Baggy Shankar. Any others? Okay. Late items, anyone wants to introduce? There's none I'm aware of. There are no petitions. Agenda item number 4, identification of urgent items to which calling will not apply. There are none. Declarations of interest. Okay, so there are no recommendations for Corporate Scrutiny Governance Board. On to the next item, which is General Fund Revenue Budget. Colleagues, this report recommended a revenue budget of 214,978,416 for 2017-18, with savings of 28.4 million required over the 3 years to 2020. Consultation closed on 9th of January, and we reviewed and we have listened to some of the proposals. Following the provisional settlement announcement by government in December and a further review of budget since we consulted with the public, we've been able to delay some of the savings proposals as detailed in paragraph 10.4, including Beeline and neighbourhood management. The changes are reflected in paragraph 4.4 and in the table at paragraph 4.6. Changes to funding are detailed in paragraph 5.5, most notably a further reduction in government funding following the provisional settlement and the Adult Social Care Council tax increase, which is proposed at 3% in 2017-18, 3% in 2018-19, and nil in 2019-20. Support to other initiatives are detailed in paragraph 5.12. Further details are available throughout the report, and the recommendations are set out on 2.1 to 2.14. There is one proposed amendment to the recommendations to include the words "as necessary" at the end of recommendation 2.4. The recommendations are set out in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.2. Any questions or contributions from anyone? Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few. Can I just ask first, though, page 23, Appendix 3, it talks about the Revenue Support Grant top-up and business rates. Can I ask the relevant Cabinet member or officer just to give us an update on, as we move towards 2020 with 100% retained business rates and the Council moves towards that model, could you just give us an update on where you think we are, whether what our position is in terms of the potential government giving us some top-up funds, or how we're going to meet that move from council tax retention to 100% business rates? Probably Martin, maybe.
Chair, if I can. Yes, Councillor, it's completely unclear as we get to 2020 and 100% business rates. There are a number of work streams that government are going through with the LGA and professionals across all the councils, the technical experts, to work out how will that formula work, because there would have to be a change in formula, obviously, and what other responsibilities might have to come to local authorities to, if the basis of the extra 50% business rates is greater than the need of that council. And whether there would then be the same sort of things like top-ups and tariffs and safety nets. It's pretty much very similar to what happened when we got the 50% business rates, but it gets a little bit more complex because it really is a bit of an all or nothing sort of scenario, because you are so reliant on business rates at that time. So there's lots of work going on, but nothing absolutely clear yet. In terms of the budget we've got in front of us for the 3 years, this is the 3 years prior to when that might happen. So that's why we've got uncertainty into what will be years 4 and year 5.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few others. On page 27, could I ask for a little bit more detail on the emerging waste plant pressure? That's total people service pressures, 241,000. And also on the same row, leisure services, estimated running costs of the new pool. So is this expected to, the 400,000, is that expected to be a yearly pressure, or is it that, where does that fit? Is that going to be the situation where we perceive that's going to be the pressure per year of running the swimming pool in terms of the council's revenue?
Okay, thanks, Chair. In terms of the emerging waste plant pressure, we are I think people need to remember we're already in a waste contract. We've been in a waste contract for probably 3 years or so now, over a 25-year period. A big part of that is the waste treatment plant at Sinfin, which will come online. It was due to come online in April this year. It won't be, it'll be delayed. However, the contract that we agreed with the funders and the operator is that we would pay an amount through our contract as at the 1st of April, and it increases to this sum. The other thing to remember is that that waste still has to be treated, so that waste is still being transferred to other facilities to be dealt with at a cost to the contractor, because actually it would be more beneficial for the contractor to deal with it locally. So this was always an anticipated change. What we didn't know is what that change amount would be until fairly recently. Derbyshire were in exactly the same position, and we didn't realise this until some 3, 4, 5 months ago. The basis of the whole treatment facility, though, is that whilst the cost may rise, it will be cheaper than if we had to deal with things through landfill tax and just the escalating contract there. So it's a saving of increased costs, I guess. In terms of the estimated running cost of the new pool, you'll see in the capital programme we've got an allocation of £20 million towards a new swimming pool, and we believe that if that goes to plan, it will come on stream in 2019-20, and there will be a subsidy required to run that new facility. The 400,000 there will be an annual amount, but it is only an estimate because we don't exactly know what that facility will be yet. How big it will be, what will the cost be, how can we make sure that we can plan the building to reduce that cost in terms of operation. So we don't exactly know, but that's our base estimate at this point in year. But it's £400,000 per year from 1920 onwards.
Thank you, Chair. And finally on this section then, on total communities and place pressures on that row, could I just ask for a little bit more? What is the specific spending in terms of increased resilience with accountancy assurance? You know, what is that specifically? And then the second one, increased insurance premium costs as a result of what? And also the national living wage. Is that because the government's national living wage is effectively catching up with the council's self-imposed scheme? Or have I got that completely wrong?
Taking these in turn, Chair, the resilience within the accountancy assurance framework, you will absolutely be sure, I'm aware that you will be, and certainly the Audit and Accounts Committee are, that we are working towards signing off our 2015-16 accounts with our external auditors. We have recognised that there are some assurance frameworks we need to tighten up on, and this is actually putting some money back in to make sure that our quality assurance is actually as robust as it needs to be. So that is actually putting some more resource back into the service to make sure we deal with those issues. In terms of insurance is increasing year on year. We do have a reserve currently to deal with some rising prices in insurance, and we can deal with that through 2017-18. But our predictions are that we'll need some extra funding in 2019-20. We've been at, I guess, at high risk in terms of insurance for a number of issues that you will have seen through previous cabinet papers, and we need to make sure that we get that right. And the final one on national living wage, you're absolutely right. The national government living wage goes up quite steeply, and the cost of pay in terms of local sector at 1%, and any foundation living wage goes up much slower. And at that point in time, in 2019-20, we believe one will overtake the other, and that's when that will be.
Okay, Mr. Youthmer.
Firstly, a question. On page 29, for the communities in place budget, it has 3 million coming out from a strategic review of leisure, culture and tourism services. And I was just wondering if there could be any clarification on what that 3 million would look like when that comes out of the leisure services, which include libraries and Derby Arena, and parks, and what difference that would make to those services. But then I've also got a comment. I've hoped people have had a chance to look at the consultation documents, and young people often get a lot of slack for saying that they don't engage within politics, but amazingly over 2/3 of the responses to this year's consultation have been by young people on the issue of the B-line. And so I think I want to say a thank you on behalf of all 30,000 young people in Derby that the council has made the decision to extend the B-line for an additional year, which will make a massive difference, especially to the poorest young people in this city, allowing them to get affordable transport and encouraging people to be able to use more renewable transport. I do also have a question about that though, because I see 66,000 from the B-line is coming out this year, and so I was just wondering that if the service is continuing till next year, how come 66,000 is still coming out this year, and just whether that could be explained, how the service is going to be able to continue despite that. Yeah.
Okay, if we start with the leisure one, Chair, this is a culmination of a number of proposals that were in last year's consultation document. So we've obviously got available to us, this is this year's consultation document, and a lot of the proposals around leisure were in last year's consultation document, which was for the 3 years. And so there's much more detail in there, and in fact in the budget that went to council last February around the details of what they were, but that's bringing a lot of those things together. So the actual detail is more so in those other papers. In terms of voice in action, I absolutely agree with the youth mayor. It is one of the consultations that I look forward to doing every year and meeting with the young people, and it is by far the most robust challenge that I personally get on the budget, and I welcome their comments. In terms of the B-line line of 80,000 that we're retaining in the 66, it's my understanding that we can still continue with the scheme with £80,000, so there's actually £140,000 in the budget, but we can still deliver that scheme on £80,000. So there should be no risk to the service in that, and the strategic directors nodding the same thing.
Chair, yeah, I'm feeling there's an elephant in the room here and nobody dares mention it. I'll mention it, page 27. All those costs, and I'd like either the director, Andy Smith or Martin Marples, just to go through them, because all those pressures that we face because of adult care and the change in demographics dwarfs and affects negatively all the issues we've actually touched upon this evening so far. And once I turn my phone off, then I'll be able to outline those. And I think it's because of those pressures that we saw last week, when we saw a Conservative council engaged in some dodgy, secret, sweetheart deal where they're proposing a 15% increase in their council tax, not 5%, 4.9% as we are here, just to meet their needs in one of the wealthiest parts of this country. That's the scale of the problem. That's what's affecting this budget. That's what's driving the 4.9%. And it's about time that somebody said it here in this chamber, because we all know that is the case. We know that affects every other service that we have in this city and throughout the country. And until that is addressed properly, all councils, including Derby, will be faced with this problem. I, together with a Conservative council, Thurrock, and a Labour council, York, have written to Jeremy Hunt to meet with him because of the problems of adult social care. No reply so far. We won't get a sweetheart deal, and that's Labour and Conservative. Myself, with the leader of Nottingham County Council, have written to Mowbray, again about the same problem. The answer, none so far. Until we get an answer to that question, all councils in this country will remain this continuing problem, and it's about time that we said this loudly and we address this in a cross-party way, because until we do that, everything will be negatively affected. So can we just go through quickly those pressures, please, Mr. Marples or Andy, and then I think it's important that we look at those and the effects of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and run through these things as quickly as I can. The budget recognises the pressures in adult social care as a result of the impact of the Care Act, population growth and a general rise in demand for services. We know from an adult social care perspective that the fastest growing section of the population are the over 85s and those living with a learning disability of working age. And when you look at the numbers of people that we're supporting, it tends to be the over 85s and those with a learning disability in terms of the largest consumers of adult social care services. The pressures that are outlined on page 27 of the report, I'm happy to go through them very briefly, line by line, if that would help, Chair. In terms of the commissioned care costs, this reflects the impact of the living wage in terms of the care that we have to purchase, that we have to buy in. We have to pay the living wage fully in our fee models. If we pay anything less than that, then that potentially leads to risks and challenge for the council. And our fee comparisons in Derby compare very favourably to other councils in the region. Continuation of the Care Act and the demographic social care pressures. This reflects the impact the Care Act is having in Derby in terms of an increase in safeguarding referrals, an increase in what's called DOLs or deprivation of liberty, so that are for adults that may not have the capacity to make decisions, that live in any type of institutionalised care, coupled with that rise in demand for adult social care for the reasons I've outlined earlier. The Better Care Fund, this is a technical issue around passporting the correct amount for mental health enablement and the Better Care Fund. So it's a technical issue as opposed to any other issue in relation to demand. Similarly, the Independent Living Fund, which is the ILF, that grant, that's just a revision of the amount we're going to receive in relation to the ILF now. So it's just about making sure that we reflect the revised forecast in the budget. And then the last one in relation to adult social care is really, as we've talked about, the ongoing pressures that we have in the system in terms of the future pressures based on the population growth and how we think that's going to impact on demand moving forward. The other issue here is in relation to schools. I won't pick that up unless there's any particular question, but that picks up on the adult social care, Chair.
Any other questions, contributions from anyone? Councillor Skelton, please.
Going a few pages forward to number 29, the removal of revenue funding to support small-scale reactive traffic management work. Am I right in thinking that the impact of that is going to be, for example, if there's a particular area that might need a small-scale intervention, such as double yellow lines on a particular area or something like that, that just will not get done?
Hi, Chair. I think that when this proposal was put forward and it was included in last year's budget, that is the implication. I think what we will clearly be doing is reviewing that proposal and seeing if there are other efficiencies within the traffic management service that can help to alleviate that situation. But when we were considering what are non-statutory services, actually there are elements of the traffic management service that we deliver that are non-statutory. So that's what that is about. Yeah.
I have a few more if that's possible. Just above it, the review of parking and traffic management enforcement activities and charging areas, obviously. Does that mean that the areas that are going to be under charging is going to increase? I had heard something about the Ascot Drive area. Are there any others?
Chair, we are... well, as it suggests in the paper, we are reviewing all of the charging areas. We are looking at bringing in some additional areas where we feel that having a charge and an enforcement regime will assist with traffic management in that area. We're looking to bring a report to a future Cabinet meeting that will set out the details as part of that implementation.
Right. The removal of the annual funding grant to the Museums Trust, is that a year early? Or was the Trust anticipating that it would be removed this year?
The proposal is that for 18-19 that will be removed. So they can continue with that level of grant through 17-18.
Chair, if I can add, it's not a year earlier than anticipated, but remember when the budget moves on, what was year 3 last year becomes year 2 now, so it's in the same year as it was in last year's MTFP.
Also picking up on some of the things the Youth Mayor was asking to do with the strategic review of leisure, culture, tourism, etc., etc. Obviously, we're well aware of the libraries review that's being done at the moment. Have all the other ones reported back yet publicly, or are they still to start or in progress at the moment?
Chair, at the moment we are carrying out what we're calling a leisure, culture and tourism options appraisal, which is essentially looking at the services delivered through that department, which does include libraries and the way they're delivered as opposed to the libraries review itself. So that piece of work is ongoing and we'll be bringing back a report to members on that in due course. A number of the savings that are identified for 17-18 are actually related to us trying to make the services more commercial and therefore bringing in additional income. The result of the leisure options appraisal will be around whether there are different ways to deliver the service, different delivery models such as trusts or arm's length organisations, which will have a better opportunity to make the services more sustainable going forward.
Okay, any other questions, contributions from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, that's great, thank you.
Chair, can I just ask for that addition to that recommendation to be read out again? Including the amendment, Chair, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's been noted. Thank you. Okay. Agenda item number 8, and that's a report of the Chief Finance Officer, reports on the robustness of estimates and the adequacy of reserves, 2017-18.
Thank you, Chair. This is my statutory report, which I have to produce and put in front of Cabinet and then full Council. It sits alongside the budget reports that are in these papers, and I can inform Cabinet that I can confirm that the estimates used in formulating the budget are robust and that the reserves held to manage the risks and for future liabilities are adequate. Recommendations are at 2.1 and 2.4 for Cabinet to consider. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Chair. Martin, could you just confirm, where is it, page 13, redundancy funding. So, is it 99 or 100 FTEs that are detailed somewhere else in the budget documentation, potential redundancies? Have I got that wrong? 100 estimated? And does, if that's the case, if that's wrong, obviously correct me, but would the 250,000 fully cover that estimation?
Can I just ask where you look at where the 250,000 is, Chair?
Page 13, sorry.
Okay, right, I'm with it now. Sorry, I thought we'd gone back on one report. Yes, there are some figures allocated for potential redundancies as we go through the savings proposals. The redundancy funding here, it is a nominal allocation. We do have a reserve for redundancies, which is held specifically. It isn't as high as it used to be, but then we're not getting through the redundancies in these years aren't to the same extent that they have been in previous years. But again, it is a nominal allocation. It is there for if there are shocks greater than anticipated. So I mean, it's an amount that's set aside. Will we need it? Hopefully not, because we manage the reduction in workforce through natural wastage, so from from vacancies, etc. as we go.
Okay, any further questions, contributions from anyone on this? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item 9, capital budget 2017-18 to 2019-20. This report recommends a capital programme for 2017-18 to 2019-20 of 212,924,271, of which approximately 78 million is funded from borrowing and is incorporated in the revenue budget. We have a number of major schemes to deliver as outlined in paragraph 1.1 of the report, including an allocation of 20 million towards the building of a new swimming pool. Details of the programme are shown in Appendix 2. The recommendations are set out in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.7 with the following proposed changes. All recommendations to be preceded by the following wording to recommend to Council the following. And recommendation 2.6 to read to approve the prudential indicators and the borrowing requirement as outlined in section 9 and detailed in Appendix 5. Any questions or contributions on that? Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you. 6.2, it talks about the borrowing potential 20 million. A couple of questions there. So what is that 20 million based on? If we, I know obviously work's ongoing, which we're not necessarily privy to, and certainly the detail of what's being proposed, which will obviously come to light, I hope, soon. So there's that question. What is that based on? Is that based on a similar scheme somewhere else? How has it been calculated? And also, when it says programme to contribute to the build, could you just clarify? Is this going to be perceived to be a solely council-funded project, or, as these wordings maybe suggest, there's going to be other funding as well to obviously contribute to a larger build, which would be more than 20 million? Just clarity on that.
I think at this at the stage of the work that we're at, so we are carrying on with the feasibility study at the moment. We have a number of options that are going to be presented to members, and I think essentially we don't know the total build cost because we don't know what the options are, and some build costs may be more than 20 million, but they may have a commercial element that means that the borrowing can be funded out of that element. So I think what we're saying is, and proposing, is that 20 million is funded to be borrowed by the council in the bottom line figures, but that when we come back with the full business case, it's at that point that we will have then an assessment against the options and the overall business case and the commerciality as to actually how much and how the funding is put in place. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Christine said, that 20 million is based on the work that's been done so far by the officers working on this, there will be a number of options that will come back to Cabinet for consideration, those options will range in cost. So the actual total cost may be more than 20 million, depending on the size and whether you include leisure water and all sorts of other different options that we can look at, and the level of commercial involvement in it as well, which is again still to be decided.
Just one more question on that then. When we talk about in the previous report the perceived 400,000 subsidy ongoing from 2020, I think it was, does that include paying back the money, interest if you like, or is that just purely perceived to be a subsidy for running costs from the council?
That's just the running cost, Chair. The borrowings within the borrowing lines on that revenue report.
Chair, just for clarity for the meeting, I think we need to be really clear that it will very much depend on what the members decide in terms of the design. First, what the build cost will be, and secondly, what the day-to-day running cost will be. All we're doing is putting in here a prudent estimate. We know it will cost at least 20 million. We know it will cost at least 400,000 in subsidy. There is not a municipal pool in the country that runs at a profit. So if we can move to a commercial model, but that will then very much come down to the compromises you make with that commerciality, because clearly whoever's put that commercial money in will want a payback, and we will need to understand what that does in terms of limiting public swimming space and et cetera, et cetera. So there are huge things to be detailed out in terms of both cost and clarity around what your day-to-day running cost will be. So what we're doing simply with this budget, because it's a considerable time in future, is to say we need to make an allocation of something at the moment, because it would be wrong to start to say we're going to bring forward a 50-metre pool and not have made any allocation in the budget. That would be correct. So I think what we can say is there's an allocation there. It may well be added to, probably will be added to as we get nearer to it, but we're making a reasonable amount of provision, and we may do that over a number of years to get to the amount of money that will be required to run the final facility that's developed.
Okay, any Councillor Grace, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell me the amount for the Environmental Agency Flood Defence, the 23.2 million? Will that cover all the phases of Oakmoor? And where do you expect the shortfall to come from?
It won't cover all of the phases because the estimated cost of the whole project was 90 to 95 million. The funding that is in the capital programme is sufficient to complete phase 1 of the project, which takes it down to Exeter Bridge, and that will be a cell of the flood zones that's required. We are continuing to develop our funding strategies with the help of the LEP. We have a contribution from Local Growth Fund, and we are also working on with developers along the route to ensure that they can bring forward flood defences that are required as part of their scheme that will also help to mitigate our scheme. But there is likely to still be a gap, and we are working hard on bridging that gap, working with the Environment Agency, and we will no doubt have further discussions with the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs.
Can you tell me what the gap is at the moment?
I think it's of the order of 45 to 50 million. So at the moment, the current estimated cost of the scheme has actually come down because quite a large proportion of the cost estimate is a contingency figure. As we actually construct the work, then that contingency can come out. So I can't give you a figure today on exactly what the gap is, but I can provide you with our latest estimates.
Just to build on what Christina said as well, the other thing we're doing around the gap is we are lobbying government on the basis that there are other cities, since we got our award, that have been given the full amount. For instance, Leeds bid a similar method that we did. We got our award and we're given the amount we got for phase 1. Leeds were given the full amount for all phases. So there is an inherent issue in terms of how funding is being divided across the country, and we're making that point very forcibly to the EA and to government about saying, you know, we need to be treated on parity. No better, no worse. So there does seem to be very many models around flood funding at the moment, which need to be standardised, and we should get the same that you know, Leeds and other cities are getting.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it takes me back. I remember that day in Parliament when our then MP for Derby North, Chris Williamson, took this up with George Young, the Leader of the House. And following from that, fact, things seem to get moved where we got some of that funding provided where nobody else was getting in the country. It's a shame that we don't have somebody fighting this at the corner for Derby again when we see that Leeds getting 100% funding. So I think I agree with the Chief Executive. I think we need to be going back to government and saying, look, you've got to have some parity here. Let's make sure that we get towards that 100% that other cities have got, rather than just a fraction. As welcome as that is, but no, we do need to build on that. So I would hope that we'll all across party political divide would agree on that. Thank you, Chair.
I just wonder if Councillor Repton was criticising Margaret Beckett there.
No, not at all. It was a given that Margaret Beckett was there then. It's just a shame that we don't have both MPs fighting the corner. Margaret has to fight doubly hard and is doing so.
Okay, any other further questions? Mr. Youth Mayor, please.
Sorry, I might just be being ignorant, but on page 33 it says that 0.8 million for next year of the capital budget is being funded by revenue contributions. I was just wondering, is this money that could be used to be providing other services if it wasn't in the capital budget? I was just wondering if that could be clarified.
These revenue contributions, Chair, come from within the services. So, for example, if we are purchasing certain assets that they require, we use the revenue funding in those services to pay for those assets. Alternative, I guess, would be you could lease such assets, but actually we need that facility anyway. This is just a way of paying for them.
Okay, any other questions, contributions from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 10, Treasury Management Strategy 2017-18. This report is the annual Treasury Management Report for 2017-18. It details the arrangements and limits regarding management of debt, borrowing for the Council and the boundaries for cash investments during the year. Details are in the report and the recommendations are set out in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.4. Any questions, contributions from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the Councillor Holmes, please.
Just one, it's a standard question I sort of ask every year. Could I just ask Martin his opinion on the way he feels interest rates may go and how the Council's going to react to that in terms of its borrowing and its costs?
We have new Treasury advisors, Trade Risks, who we speak to on a regular basis, and they give us an indication of where they believe markets will go. There's obviously there's the central case of where the Bank of England think they go, and then we've got our advisors, and they're pretty much in line. There's no indication that there's going to be a massive hike in interest rates and borrowing rates in the near future. Everybody's predicting a 0.25% rise and then another quarter 6 months later, and just creeping up in effect. But they said that a few years ago and it's just been flat. So it's a pretty static position really. So they're likely to rise at some point, but not they won't rise exponentially. It'll be a creep, and we will know when it's going to happen. So we will react accordingly.
Okay, any other questions or contributions from anyone? Okay, so, okay. Yeah. Okay, so agenda item number 11, dedicated schools grant.
We approve the recommendations in item 10.
Okay. So the report details the dedicated schools budget for 2017-18.
We just need to approve the recommendations in item 10.
Oh, in item 10, yes, I beg your pardon, yes. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations in item 10.
All those in favour?
So I was one step ahead there. Thank you. So dedicated schools grant, agenda item number 11. The report details the dedicated schools grant for 2017-18. The major changes relate to the adjustments to the early years formula and changes to the deprivation factors. Schools Forum approved budget at their meeting last week, and school budgets have been prepared ready for submission. Details are in the report, the recommendations set out in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.4. Okay, any questions?
In the report, it talks about how the amount of funding, base rate of funding from early years currently 89.5%, how that's got to increase to, I think it's 95% in 2018. And I assume that's going to hit on the amount of money that the council has in order to provide its services. And I was just wondering if any measures were being taken to, sorry, that's on the beginning of page 6, 4.9, the high pass through requirement. And so I was just wondering if that does take away money from the council, what provisions have been taken for that?
Yeah, there is an impact certainly on schools through this. What we don't know though is, remember, this is the dedicated schools grant budget for 2017-18. There is an indication that funding for 18-19 may be, because 17-18 is pretty flat really, 18-19 may well be an increase. But what we don't know is, because there's still consultations in place, we don't exactly know how that's going to factor. So a bit similar to the business rates, which is sort of 2020 onwards, the impact of school funding beyond 17-18 is still a bit uncertain.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just briefly, in response to Philip's question, local government finance is very confusing and schools finance is no different. So this year there's consultations on changes to both DSG and ESG, but also, as well as that, next year there's going to be a national funding formula change, which means that actually schools' budgets are kind of all over the place at the moment. So it's really difficult for schools, firstly, to ascertain what's going to happen in terms of fluctuation, because there's all sorts of indices that change as part of the funding formula, and then the changes that are happening now, specifically with ESG and DSG, are very confusing. So to try and cut through all this, I think next year the picture will be much clearer when we change the national funding formula, so schools at least will know where they're going to be, because at the moment they don't.
Okay, any other questions or contributions from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, excellent, thank you. That brings that Cabinet to a close. Thank you. I think for all those who are going to enjoy the beer festival, please do so.